astuto. Future, the idea is to have a space to exchange concepts as how the data centers are evolving in the era of artificial intelligence. Thomas Lynch, you have the floor as moderator of this panel. Good morning, everyone. I have several devices. The party had its casualties, apparently. But we'll continue nevertheless. Data centers have always been the stars of internet infrastructure. Without data centers, it would have been impossible to communicate with one another, and for various companies, it is a very specific and indispensable place. Data centers in Latin America, and particularly in Brazil, today face new challenges but also have new opportunities. The various capacities that are being managed, not only in terms of traffic and bandwidth, but also in terms of power, cooling, and space. So with the new GPU devices now used for artificial intelligence, data centers today have to cater for all these new demands. So we have invited the 4 members of the panels who have been introduced already. We have Fred from Nick BR, Hubert from Sirion, Esther from Telsius, and Rafael Asuto from Ascenti. So let us chat with them on these new challenges and opportunities. Allow me to start with a question. And if you could solve a major challenge of the data center industry, which challenge would you solve? Let me start with Hubert. Good. It's a great pleasure to be here speaking to you and regarding this very specific topic that has been the engine of current society. Technology is expanding, so the use of this type of infrastructure is facing several demands to meet the needs of society. But this is also complicated. When we speak about a challenge, we speak about data centers. In this context, we see that there is like a conglomerate of data centers, particularly here in Brazil, in the southeast region and the southern region of the country. In these areas, we observe that there is a large volume of businesses and companies that work in-house. So there is an opportunity for growth in the southeast region. The 60% of the environment is still in-house. So we do see opportunities for growth in order to reach these companies. But when we take this to the rest of the country, and I'm referring to the fact that Brazil is a country that has the size of a continent, it's as if Europe and all data centers would be in France and Germany, and would then have to cater for all the European countries. So Brazil is like that. In order to reach and increase the growth based on the incremental volume of users, business, and enterprises that we have in other parts of the country, we're also always facing the challenge of how to build these high-density data centers. So in order to place these data centers, we do face certain objectives that we have to meet. And these have to do with power, with electricity. For Brazil, we have 93 of all power in the country. that is from clean energy sources. This is a record percentage that we have. But when we take this to the far regions, looking at the northeast of the country, there's quite a lot of polarization between renewable and other types of energy. This is a high density type of power consumption. Now, outside the hours of the day, for example, where we can supply this with solar energy, for example. So transporting power in the country has to evolve. We see that the governments are aware of this situation and have planned to increase the infrastructure in many times. And then we have another issue, that is data transmission. How can we improve the latency, and how can we cater for that data transport? Because if we put a center in the north, it will not only be catering for the northern part of the country, we also have to cater for the other part of the country in the north. So groups such as these that involves all the companies of the sector, the idea is for them to assist us in meeting this challenge and expand the amount of data centers in several regions of the country, particularly in Brazil. So interesting. Frederic, challenges? Good morning, everyone. As Hubert was saying, Brazil already has a very clean power grid, by far number one in G20. The second position is held by Canada, who is 30% behind Brazil in this regard. So we don't have an issue from the standpoint of power generation. But as we heard, we are facing a major challenge in terms of power transmission. There is a great deficiency in the Brazilian market. About a year and a half ago, national systems operators have to restrict the wind power in the northeast of Brazil because we don't have the capacity to distribute that power that is generated. So this does pose a major challenge. This is because the investments, as Hubert was saying, is of millions of reales. This is something that is shared by all the users of the SIM system, the National Integrated System. So if we just focus on one industry, this is something that cannot be restricted to just one industry. And regarding the data centers, the major challenge we face today is focusing on energy efficiency, without doubt. In that regard, we have to recall that a data center basically is like a toaster. All the power you have there generates heat, and there is a lot of work that is not just power. We can speak about the photons that go through the fiber optics, but this means that we have to work a lot in the field of energy efficiency. In a country, and specifically referring to Brazil, I would like to speak of the other countries in the region. Brazil is a region that is clearly a tropical region, so we have to work on systems that don't use thermal types of devices, because thermodynamics is relentless. Although we have ultra efficient systems, and even using thermal devices, we start with a POA of 1.2 and not less than that. So the free cooling does not exist. Like you don't have a free meal. Nothing is free in this world. And even if we are in other countries of the region, and even if we would have the capacity to manage cooling in a cheaper way, it always involves costs. So we have to work in more efficient types of devices in data centers. So we really have to focus on the patterns that are being produced from the CPU. And specifically in this field, we have to invest in rejecting heat using fluids, PLC. So that would be the way forward. Thank you, Fred. Esther, the same question addressed to you. What are the challenges in Latin America? Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to join the panel. This has been a last-minute change, but here we are. In addition to the comments we have heard from our colleagues and the major challenges that we face, we also have the availability and sustainability of electricity. This would be one of the challenges we face, in addition to connectivity of the data centers. We have seen that based on the demand implied by artificial intelligence in terms of space and in terms of energy, it is foreseen that there will be a major growth in the power supply that will be required to cater for the needs of the data centers. So in the case of Latin America, there have been issues, or there might be issues, to cater for this demand.
And this is due, on the one hand, to the fact that the source of energy available to those countries is not sufficiently diverse. They don't have hydraulic or gas energy, and some countries in Latin America need to buy energy to others. So this is a constraint for data centers in these regions. There's another issue that is important, and it is that the data centers are centralized in the most important cities in each country, and this may be a limitation. Sao Paulo, Santiago, Bogota already have many data centers, and this implies a challenge in supply. So an opportunity that we see is diversifying and taking the data centers to smaller or coastal cities, Barranquilla, Fortaleza in Brazil, or Valparaíso in Chile. We are now seeing the growth of the data centers, and there they may be more availability. In coastal cities, there are submarine cables coming. So the other challenge that we have was interconnection, because another big demand of artificial intelligence is connectivity, low latency, and a better bandwidth. So the fact that more data centers are in the coast makes it easier to connect them with submarine cables, making it easier to deliver it to other parts of the country. So there we see a potential growth, for instance, in these cities. In other cities that are not as important in each country, yes, submarine cables are essential. Thank you, Esther Astuto. Thank you, Esther. Now, Rafael Astuto, what are the challenges? Well, I wanted to bring another vision about the operation of data centers. We have huge challenges of connection of the machines that get multiplied, brakes, batteries, devices in general, in the data centers. That is critical for any construction, but we must not forget the human factor that operates that data center. We need to create, we need to train, we need to teach the young people what the market of a data center is. When we speak of technical courses and how to increase skills, they don't say much about the data centers, and they speak a lot of the traditional industry, but not this. And we need to bring the technical people together to appeal them and to organize courses with the students of these technical and professional people, so that they may see, for instance, what the cloud is. We talk a lot about the cloud, but people don't know what a data center is. I always tend to say, explain what a data center is to your mother. If you cannot explain it, it's because you yourself don't have a clear idea. Because the people that are working there need to understand how relevant it is. Today, nothing works with no connectivity, without the internet. Nothing works if the cloud is not there. Everything we do now depends on the data center that is operated by people, even if we have a very high automation level. The number of people that are skilled is much larger than what we indeed manage to supply in the market and to use in the market. So the companies that are in the data centers need to create that incentive, originating from the companies or the universities, promoting the local schools in the region, so that everybody may understand what the market is, so that we may have increasingly well-trained professionals, because we have high technology machines, we have the technical knowledge, the expertise, but we need people that may do it in a safe manner, resiliently, and with enough availability to get the best level of data centers, not just the cloud data centers, but the new ones for AI. And that is the big challenge. We are very used to the way the traditional data centers work. When we speak of quick cooling, QC, we absolutely change the way we work. We are taking water to the data centers. I have valves, I have more sensors, more devices. It's much more complex. I have to change the way we operate, the process of what, and the business continuity plan needs to change. I need to adapt and to update my vision of the technical professionals, so that they may be paying close attention to the new challenges that we have ahead. Well, yes, when I went to school, I was explained how fiber optic worked and how routers worked, but nobody told me how everything got together in a single place. And so your comment is a good start of how have the geopolitical and economic factors, what incidents have they had to the operations of the data centers in the region? And let me start precisely with you, Rafael Astuto, so that you may go on with this discussion. Thank you. Certainly today, well, precisely, and connecting it with my first question, maybe the big challenge of Brazil today is not exclusively of the data center market, but the entire industry in terms of the tax burden. As an industry, as data center, we get together to have more representativeness, to incentivize a reduction in taxes. Essentially, when importing machines, you know that the key machinery of the data centers, unfortunately, is not manufactured in Brazil. Usually they're imported from the United States, Europe, and China. Therefore, we need to have to reduce our tax burden so that we may have uh, so that we may be more competitive. We have a big factor, energy, as was already said by some of the speakers. As a matter of fact, this is a great attraction that we have vis-a-vis our global competitors, not just because it's clean energy, but also because of the cost of energy. Today, it's among the cheapest energies in Brazil. We have clean energy, inexpensive energy, and we have land. Three key factors that and many countries are struggling to get them. In Europe, we have sources that come from oil, natural gas, coal. There's land resources are more limited and energy is more expensive. So in Brazil, we have all these advantages. We have to create incentives for the industry to grow sustainably, and with the possibility of opening for the possibility of importing the machines at a lower cost, so that as a consequence, the cost of implementing it, whatever it may be for the data center, may be lower and lower, so that we can bring foreign companies in Brazil, and for them to understand that we have that level of competitiveness comparing essentially, especially considering the costs for operating. And that's a big challenge when we see the geopolitics, when we see the impact in our data centers. Well, I wanted to speak about taxes. Um, the taxes are short and medium term, because in the long term, well, when you invest, it's not that you reduce taxes 100%, but I understand that it's a current problem. I agree with that. That will get solved in 2033. So I think that one of the proposals of government in terms of their national policy for data centers is tax exemptions. So one of the arguments is that this is an anticipation of the reform in terms of capex of data centers. So, but that is not a challenge in the region, but a global challenge. But providers. So let me give you an example. If today you are planning to build a data center, if you haven't purchased everything for to start operating briefly, if you didn't buy the generators a year and a half ago, you won't have them. And that is a delicate issue, because industry itself, I mean, the generators, that is essentially American or European. There's also a Chinese industry, but we don't see it available in our national market yet. I don't think that the demand will continue to increase. So they were not getting ready to meet new demands, because the turnover time is very long. Since you order the machines, and the market, maybe this applies more to the European market, but not so much here in Brazil, but is the issue of second generation biodiesel, that is HVO, so that so as to reduce our carbon footprint. So because depending on our data center, we are already obliged to buy energy that is 95% of renewable energy, renewable sources. And as effectively the operations are, well, and the engines that work with gas oil. So finally, our carbon footprint is very, very high, and we have to reduce it. And at least in the Brazilian market, the way for doing it is not available. As a matter of fact, it's a big challenge that geopolitics could have an impact on. So, Hoibert Rivers. Uh, well, when we speak of geopolitics, I think that we need to observe also the opportunities available in our careers. We need to be ready because sooner or later a train will go by. It's a train of opportunities. And if we are ready, we'll be ready to get in when the doors are opened. Latin America and Brazil can become the main points for main pillars for technology. Because if we observe the geopolitical issues that are taking place now, and if we look at Europe, when we speak of clean energy, everybody's talking about carbon footprint, the industries, especially technology industries. Everybody has understood that we have to evolve as a society, worrying about carbon footprints and working with clean energy. The solar radiation level, for instance, in the Brazilian northeast in winter is higher than that of Germany in summer. So the potential for using energy of providing it to big data centers that are give service to the world is quite outstanding. So it's up to us to make the most of it.
If we look at the geopolitical scenario and AI, we're speaking about learning. It is likely that a large amount of that learning will remain in the United States and in China with them, but we need to have an expansion. The ecosystem surrounding AI will continue to grow. This is reaching the data centers with expansions of the data centers, the applications that connect to AI, the generation of learning grows. But if we look at the entire ecosystem that will continue to grow, this expansion that will take place is immense. In the United States, for example, they will have to come to Latin America if we're ready and prepared for this. They're not going to place that in China and vice versa. So Europe, with the need they have for clean energy, also have an absurd potential if they bring this to Latin America compared to going to the East. And this is due to the position we have. This is the moment we are experiencing. If the government understands what is taking place with the tax reform, with a view to 2033, 2034, this is also focused on energy transmission. So it is likely that we might take that train, embark on that train, and we might have a different scenario in Latin America and particularly in Brazil. So this was a last minute change, Esther, but maybe you'd like to add something for Latin America in general? What we see is that the geopolitical issues we are now facing has to do with taxes, and of course in some countries they view the increase in income posed by data centers, so this can lead to further investments and to building more data centers and to generating more business. This is the case of Brazil with the tax exemptions that are awaiting approval, but this is what the Ministry of Economy has at least proposed. And there are other countries like the United States who have a tariff policy that is totally different. So what this might lead to is that the investment takes place in adjacent countries. For example, in the case of Mexico, there is a strong interest to grow there because it is far simpler from the point of view of taxes. It is more advantageous to invest in Mexico. We have heard about the announcement of building a data center in Querétaro, and this is very close to the United States, so this could be an advantage. In that sense, Mexico is a country that has a large growth percentage. Subsea cables are reaching Mexico. This allows to have more connectivity and less latency to reach there. So this will lead to an explosion of data centers even greater than what we see now. The same is happening in the case of Brazil. There are other Latin American countries that are also promoting this type of growth, particularly for the reasons already explained by my colleague, in the sense of generating clean and sustainable energy sources. This is most attractive for the cloud and AI companies, because in fact these are the ones that need this power supply and interconnection and interoperability. So it's decisive to consider all the political factors, and these will be determining factors in the sense that the respective governments in the different countries can facilitate or not these entry of these players in the Latin American countries. Excellent. So I have a question here. How do you manage the future of the industry in 5 to 10 years? Or the question could be, can you imagine a future in such a long term, or this is a short term? And I'll continue with you, Esther. How do you imagine the future of the data centers from here in 5, 10 years, 25 years, or in 1 month? Well, 25 years? Well, it's unimaginable. So in 5 years' time, well, if we manage to provide the power required, and it is quite true, as has been the case with the devices and the servers, for example, the streaming servers that do not use the power that needed 10 years ago, there has been a major optimization of the devices. So I suppose the same will happen with the CPUs. So that consumption, particularly that heat dissipation of the CPUs, that leads to having racks or data centers that have racks that consume more than 100 kilowatts per rack, that will be optimized, so this can be better managed. This will then lead to a major growth of the data centers, and in Latin America, regions such as Sao Paulo, Santiago are growing significantly, so they will need, in addition to the large data centers, they need to have that major energy consumption, and also to have smaller border edge data centers where you have all the interconnections and they reach the end users from there. So all this, another thing that has to be improved is the construction of land fiber optics. There are not sufficient optic fiber. There are many Latin American countries where this fiber optic is outdated. This could be an inconvenience, or it doesn't even exist. This is an inconvenience for the development of data centers. If you place an IA data center, this is not in the region. In Zaragoza, in Spain, a major city on AI is built. The same in Brazil, around Rio de Janeiro. So these AI cities will need a lot of terrestrial and subsea optic fiber in order to reach these edge connections, and so then from there they can reach the end users, and submarine connection to connect these with one another, one data center with another. So in our case, the way we view future growth is precisely in the cities that are on the coast, and the landing stations could be a great interconnection hub that will contribute the arrival of this subsea capacity and the bandwidth and the connection to all the local operators and the AI data center itself. So this contributes to having low latency and quality connections as is required by the owners and the IPs that need these data centers. So I think over the coming years, there will not only be a growth in terms of the buildings and the energy consumption of these buildings, but how all this is interconnected in each country. And in Latin America, in Brazil, for example, this is highly developed, but there are other countries that do need major investments in this field. Quite true. Thank you, Esther. Hubert, how do you imagine the future? Well, I think, and we think, in fact, we dream and we imagine that the coming years will have to do with a repatriation of clouds. This is a strong movement. This is leading to a high demand of data centers that is quite big. There are still is a significant amount of companies or in-house companies. So there is a movement that we have noted. It turns out that many in-house companies started to generate content and applications. Some of these are in the clouds. Another made a direct movement to the cloud for geopolitical regions or for saving purposes. So we see a model that is not always viable. This largely depends on the type of traffic. So we now note that there is an opportunity. We note that there are limitations and challenges of expanding the data centers to other sections of the country. And I do agree with Esther that the trend is to have data centers, the edge data centers, for the coming 5 to 10 years. And I'm speaking about 200 megawatts or 300 megawatts. I don't think we will be able to see so many so much capillarity, but we'll have smaller data centers because we can use that energy. This not depends on a high level transmission reaching the enormous data centers in all the cities. The expansion is not only limited to Brazil, it also is happening in Latin America. Recently, we built 2 data centers in Chile and in Peru. These are high-density data centers, and we noted that there are several companies that are also active in those poles. When we speak about the longer term, I imagine the consolidation of data in high-density data centers, because we'll be much more mature and we'll have overcome the issue of power transmission. So we'll be more competitive like the companies that we have here in the telecom market. So this will facilitate data transmission at low density. So imagine that in 20 to 30 years' time will be a global pole to deliver information. So I now go to Astuto. So this is a difficult question, a complicated question. I think that with this increase and linking to this to what Hubert was saying regarding the larger and larger data centers being 200, 300, 400 megawatts, and the only data center this ends up having an impact on the environmental responsibility, because energy is something that is linked to responsibility. We generate energy, and even if this is a renewable type of energy, if we have clean energies, there nevertheless is an environmental impact in the sense of how this energy is generated. There are countries like the United States that have 4% of the energy consumption which comes from the data centers and will be increased, it will be doubled in the coming years. I wouldn't say that this is a cause for concern, but it is quite surprising in the United States, where it is very easy, for example, to use nuclear power. And there is even a need to build smaller power plants in the United States in order to produce enough energy. In Brazil, we don't have energy in the way we'd like to. But this is somehow a global trend. Nuclear energy allows us to have a large amount of energy generation. The waste will be in 50 years' time processing the waste adequately. But nevertheless, see that this is a trend in countries that do have the opportunity of having nuclear power plants. But if we bring this to Brazil, I would think this is a major challenge, having data centers that use more and more efficient energy. 10 or 15 years ago, we had different types of efficiency, but today the efficiency is much greater today. There are new data center models. We have 1.2 and 1.3, but this is Brazil. The colleagues said that the solar index we have in Brazil is higher in winter, particularly in the northeast, than what they have in Germany in summer. So we don't have different seasons. It's always summer. So air conditioning consumption is the great villain in terms of energy consumption. So data centers are a responsibility that we all share. So the entire project of building data centers, from acquiring the devices and so on, we have to be aware that we have to be as efficient as possible in order to be able to have a growth in the industry without having the impacts that we see today. Fred, would you like to add anything? This higher density model so the need for having CPUs that are closer and closer to the memory is something that won't change. This will continue the way it is. We'll continue having a more densification. Like Esther was saying, it is difficult to think of hubs that are operated with air cooling above 30 kilowatts. This is in fact quite complicating, so we opt for other options, or even alternatives that are energy efficient. What I see is that the future of the data center will have to do with DLC. This would be liquid cooling techniques. It is much more efficient than air. So this is a trend we see, the more efficient equipments, and a large amount of that heat that is rejected without the need to cool a thermal engine. The data centers have the dry coolers, but this will continue to be used. The temperature range of this technology is more favorable even in countries, tropical countries, as would be the case of Brazil, regardless of the location in the country. As we heard from the colleagues, it is likely they only have data centers that will be better distributed in the country. So this is something positive. And although we are in the telecom industry and we sometimes complain about the fact that it takes so long until we have a new submarine cable or a new optic fiber, it is far faster to do these things. So we really have to focus on a better distribution of the data centers in the region. They have to be closer to where this energy is generated. I'm referring mostly to the case of Brazil, but it is likely that this also happens in other countries of the region. As we heard previously, no one can guess what will happen in the future. This is just an informed hypothesis. Thermodynamics will not change much in the coming 5 to 10 years. That was the doubt I had. So thank you very much. But before leaving, I would like to know whether there are any questions from the public. We have microphones in the room.
No sé si soy yo, no. Ahí está.
Peter Harrison, Colivor. No es solamente una... No es solamente...
It's not only, there are other difficulties too with the data center world. There are also problems with the safety of our workers when we have racks, 100 kilowatt racks. There are safety issues. Modernization of a data center that is already active is also a problem, because we need to think of the uptime of and we also need to think how to fill a data center that is obsolete. So, what sort of customers are the customers that have more traditional workloads of AI? And there are also problems with the staff, not just IT staff, but also engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. And we also have stressed systems. For instance, with the UPS, you can see fluctuations of up to 30, 40, 50% within an hour, 5 or 6 minutes, and that's a problem. And there are also problems with the communities. The communities in the United States, where I live, don't want data centers in the cities because they make noise and etc. So there are many more problems, not just electricity and the sites. It's we need to think of the problem and its challenges more globally, all over the world, and not limiting ourselves to what we are discussing now. Thank you. I don't know whether you have any questions, because you touched upon a number of topics. That's very interesting. Yes, we agree. We fully agree. Thank you for your comments. That shows the potential that we have when in the communities where the data centers are located, and the generators and everything. It's a reality, but That is a problem for Latin America and for Brazil. So there are problems. Sometimes you don't have anything near, and those are problems that we need to solve in Brazil. And we need to reach far distant places. That is one of the problems. But I fully agree with your comments. Yes, and environmental impact depending on the municipality. And now in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, certainly we need to be careful about noise, and specifically talking about noise. So we need to be careful, alternators and entry and leaks, and we need noise attenuation and dissipation of heat. So yes, and today we can achieve very low levels of noise, but in the future we may have alternators in those premises. But it doesn't differ much of a large hospital in a metropolitan area. Basically, they have a similar infrastructure, either because of the use of energy and for the injection of heat. Those are really problems, but I think that engineers have already solved much of that. Yes, indeed. And in that regard, I was remembering the knot of Miami, the NAP. It was not so far from Miami, but it's a place where there were many things quite ugly. And now it's surrounded by buildings. And I think that happens if you put a distant data center. Every time I come to Sao Paulo, I can't believe the size of this city. So if you may build the data center far from the cities, but then people get closer to it. I don't know whether you want to add anything else about this question. No, what you mentioned about the oldest data centers and what could be done with them. For instance, we have infrastructures that are already several years old, that are the stations where the cables are tethered, and we want to reconvert them into data centers. We need to invest, but they can be used, they can be adapted to what you said, to meet today's needs of a different type of clients that don't need that density of energy. There are clients that ask for 1 kilowatt. So you can accommodate for that, and those infrastructures can be used still. And as a matter of fact, to give them new life. In addition to working as the stations, the cable stations, now they are working as data centers to large telecom and IT clients, but with different needs that may be provided in these buildings. So you can meet other demands and other customers with the obsolete infrastructure. Thank you. There's another question here. Jose Luis Abraham from Mexico. The way I understand it, AI requires fluid for cooling. What are the risks, or how can you avoid those risks in data centers? We know that coolers are scarce and water is scarce. So how can we solve that problem in data centers? Rafael, do you want to answer that? Water consumption today in data centers is a big challenge. When we use the refrigeration system, water, if indeed. So people speak a lot of POV and the WV. other data centers. So the type of technology that is used requires consistency in each country. So it all depends in the country. In Chile, for instance, certainly the cooling system with water may not be the most adequate solution for the country that with more water. Now, in Brazil, that might not be such an important problem. However, we must be responsible and adopt more efficient solutions, not just from the point of view of energy, but also from the environmental point of view. And in a data center operations where a closed cooling system is used, the water used will be circulating in the system for many years. Of course, now and then you'll have to replace it. But if we look at the water consumption in that regard, I think that data centers today succeed in having a WAE that is zero or very close to zero, optimizing consumption, standard consumption for the people there. But certainly it's something that we have to address as an industry to provide effective solutions in that regard. I'd like to add that in recent years, we always worked, and when I speak of professionals learning to draw the water from the data centers, we teach them that, but now we need to see how to put water into the data centers. These are specific projects. And in long term, I agree with what our friend pointed out, that there's a different trend. But in the short term, or short and medium term, these are very specific projects. So what AI requires is, well, you need to learn because you are generating a large volume of energy with racks with very high consumptions of energy. When we reach Latin America, and the data center companies, what we'll do is to create a specific area with a project worked in a way so that consumption, that is, we don't see any other technologies that will to leverage it. After 3 or 4 years of learning, then it's an issue of maintenance. And when it's no longer so necessary, those are very specific projects. The data center companies already have people that are participating in similar projects in other countries, as in the United States and China, where they've made more progress in that regard. So the tendency is that AIs, for instance, today in data centers, we are using AI to tell us how to be more efficient in energy consumptions and all the operative things. So AI will also help us see how to operate AI environments more effectively, more efficiently. That is a cycle, but these are specific projects, I understand.
Would anyone else like to add something? We are on time. Allow me to thank you all. Hubert, Esther, Federico, and Rafael Astuto. We'll now continue with the LACNIC program. A big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much.